There comes a moment in life when you realize that nothing touches you the way it used to. The music that once stirred your soul now sounds like organized noise. The food you craved tastes like ash in your mouth. The company of others, even those you once loved, feels like a performance you no longer have the energy to maintain. You go through the motions of enjoyment, wearing the mask of someone who still cares, but inside, there is only a strange, hollow quiet. You tell yourself this is temporary, that you're just tired, that tomorrow, or next week, or next month the spark will return. But deep down, you know something fundamental has shifted. The world hasn't changed. You have, and what you've seen cannot be unseen. You stand on the other side of a threshold you didn't know you were crossing, and the pleasures that once defined your existence now feel like distant memories of someone else's life. You are not depressed, though that's what others might call it. You are not broken, though that's what you fear. You are something else entirely, something Dostoevsky understood with devastating clarity. You have seen behind the curtain. You have glimpsed the machinery beneath the magic. And once you see it, once you really see it, pleasure as you knew it dies, not because you've lost your capacity for joy, but because you've outgrown the kind of joy that depends on not knowing, on not seeing, on keeping your eyes half closed to the truth of what everything really is. If this is where you find yourself, if this describes the strange flatness that has settled over your experience of life, then what I'm about to share with you will either devastate you or set you free. Because what you're experiencing is not an ending, it's a beginning that feels like death. And Dostoevsky, who walked through this darkness himself and lived to map its terrain, knew exactly what you're going through and why it matters more than you can possibly imagine right now. You're not losing your mind. You're not becoming cynical or jaded or empty. What you call the loss of pleasure, Dostoevsky would call the birth of consciousness. You are waking up, and waking up, as anyone who has truly done it knows, is not the blissful sunrise of spiritual cliches. It is the agonizing process of seeing what most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You are becoming one of Dostoevsky's underground men, those strange souls who cannot stop thinking, cannot stop seeing, cannot return to the comfortable illusions that make ordinary life bearable. This is not a curse, though it will feel like one. This is initiation. You are being initiated into a deeper way of being human, one that most people never experience because they never pay the price of admission. And that price is exactly what you're paying now. The loss of simple pleasures, the death of easy satisfaction, the end of distraction as a viable strategy for existence. In his works, Dostoevsky returned again and again to characters who had crossed this same threshold. Raskolnikov, in Crime and Punishment, could no longer enjoy a simple meal after he understood the mathematics of suffering, after he calculated the exchange rate between one life and another and found the equation unbearable. The underground man could not participate in the cheerful gatherings of his former friends because he saw too clearly the desperate performance beneath their laughter, the fear masquerading as confidence, the emptiness dressed up as purpose. Prince Mishkin, in The Idiot, moved through the world like a ghost among the living, unable to find pleasure in the games people played because he perceived the pain they were trying to escape. These were not mentally ill characters in the clinical sense. They were psychologically evolved beyond the point where normal pleasures could satisfy them. They had seen something, and what they had seen changed everything. What exactly have you seen? What is this knowledge that kills pleasure? Dostoevsky understood it with precision. You have seen that everything people pursue, everything they claim brings them happiness, is really just elaborate architecture built to avoid confronting the fundamental questions of existence. You watch people throw themselves into careers, relationships, hobbies, causes, and you see through it all to the motivation beneath, the terror of stillness, the fear of silence, the desperate need to fill the void with anything, anything at all, rather than look directly at it. You've seen that pleasure itself is often just relief from discomfort we create, so we can experience the relief. We make ourselves hungry, so we can enjoy eating. We make ourselves lonely, so we can enjoy company. We create tension, so we can experience release. The whole cycle is a game we play with ourselves, and once you see the game, you cannot unsee it. The pleasure collapses because you recognize it as manufactured, as dependent on maintaining a carefully controlled ignorance. But there's something deeper still, something that Dostoevsky explored in The Brothers Karamazov through Ivan's rejection of God's world. You have seen the price that is paid for everything, every pleasure, every joy, every moment of happiness exists on a foundation of suffering, somewhere, somehow. The meal you eat required something to die. The comfort you enjoy required someone else to labor in discomfort. The peace you experience is purchased by violence done somewhere out of sight. The whole beautiful, terrible machinery of existence operates on a system of exchange that becomes unbearable once you truly see it. This is what Ivan meant when he said he wanted to return his ticket to paradise. Not because paradise wasn't real, but because the price of admission, the suffering of innocent beings, was too high for a conscious soul to accept. You cannot enjoy the show once you've seen what it cost to stage it. The pleasure dies in your mouth because you taste the bitter truth beneath the sweet surface. And so, you find yourself in this strange state. The old pleasures don't work anymore. Music sounds hollow because you hear the desperation in the musician's need to be heard. Food tastes empty because you know it's just fuel for a body that will decay regardless. Conversation feels futile because you recognize the scripts everyone is reading from, the roles everyone is playing, the lies everyone agrees to tell each other to maintain the collective illusion of meaning. You try to enjoy things the way you used to, but it's like trying to believe in Santa Claus after you've seen your parents wrapping the presents. The magic is gone, not because you've lost it, but because you've seen through it. Most people, when they encounter someone in this state, try to fix them. They suggest therapy, medication, exercise, positive thinking. They tell you to focus on gratitude, to count your blessings, to remember all the good things in your life. And you nod, and maybe you even try these things. But they don't work because they're addressing the wrong problem. You're not suffering from a chemical imbalance or a thought disorder. You're suffering from clarity. You've seen too much truth, and truth, as Dostoevsky knew, is not always liberating. Sometimes it's crushing. Sometimes it destroys your ability to function in the world as it is, because the world as it is depends on a certain level of blindness, a willingness not to look too closely, not to ask too many questions, not to see what lies beneath the surface of things. Dostoevsky himself experienced this torment. After his mock execution and years in Siberian prison, he could never again participate in normal life the way others did. He had seen too much suffering, too much cruelty, too much of the darkness that lives in the human heart. He tried to write about it, to capture it, to make others understand. But he knew that most people would never truly get it because they hadn't paid the price he paid. They hadn't stood before the firing squad. They hadn't lived in the house of the dead. They hadn't descended into the underground of human consciousness and come back changed. And so, he created characters who had descended, who had seen, who could no longer enjoy the simple pleasures that sustained everyone else. He created mirrors for those of us who would one day stand where you're standing now, feeling the terrible weight of knowing what cannot be unknown. But here is what most people miss about Dostoevsky's vision. Here is what gets lost. When people focus only on the suffering and the darkness, Dostoevsky did not believe that this state you're in is the final destination. He did not see the loss of simple pleasures as the end of joy. He saw it as the death that precedes resurrection. He saw it as the necessary destruction of false happiness to make room for true joy. The pleasure you've lost was always shallow, always temporary, always dependent on not looking too closely at reality. What you're experiencing now, this apparent emptiness, is actually the space where something deeper can emerge. But it cannot emerge while you're still clinging to the old pleasures, still trying to make them work, still attempting to unsee what you've seen. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov's redemption does not come from recovering his ability to enjoy normal life. It comes from accepting that he cannot go back, that he must move through the suffering to something on the other side of it. His pleasure returns, but it's a different kind of pleasure entirely. It's not the pleasure of distraction or satisfaction. It's the pleasure of alignment, of finally living in truth rather than in lies. It's the joy that comes from accepting reality as it is, rather than constantly trying to make it into something more palatable. This is what Dostoevsky discovered in Siberia, what he spent the rest of his life trying to articulate, that there is a joy beyond pleasure, a fulfillment beyond satisfaction, a peace beyond comfort. But you cannot access it by trying to return to the old way. You can only access it by going deeper into what you've already begun to see. You have to understand that what you're experiencing is a kind of spiritual molting. The old shell has become too tight. The old pleasures, the old satisfactions, the old ways of finding meaning, they worked for a version of you that no longer exists. You've grown beyond them, not because you're better than others, but because your consciousness has expanded, and the old containers can no longer hold what you've become. A child delights in candy. That pleasure is real for a child, but you cannot go back to being delighted by candy once you've developed an adult palate. The pleasure of candy isn't gone from the universe. It's gone for you because you've evolved beyond it. The same is true for all the pleasures you've lost. They haven't disappeared. You've outgrown them. And what feels like death is actually growth, but growth that hasn't yet revealed what it's growing toward. Dostoevsky observed this pattern in everyone who awakened to deeper consciousness. There is always a period of desert, of darkness, of wandering between who you were and who you're becoming. In this desert, nothing satisfies because you've left the old world behind but haven't yet arrived at the new one. You're in the gap, and the gap is terrifying because there's nothing to hold on to. The old pleasures are dead, but the new joy hasn't been born yet. You feel like you're dying, and in a sense you are. The you that found pleasure in surface things is dying. But death is not the end in Dostoevsky's vision. Death is transformation. Think of it this way. You've been living your life in a room lit by candles, entertained by shadows dancing on the wall. The shadows were real enough. The entertainment was genuine. But someone opened a door, and bright daylight flooded in. At first, the light is so intense, it's painful. You can't see anything clearly. Everything is washed out. And all those fascinating shadows that kept you entertained have vanished in the brightness. You might think you've lost something beautiful, but you haven't. Your eyes simply haven't adjusted to seeing in full light yet. Once they do, you'll realize you haven't lost the shadows. You've gained reality, and reality is so much richer than shadows. But it's a different kind of richness, entirely. It's not entertainment, it's truth. And truth doesn't give you the quick hit of pleasure that shadows provided, but it gives you something more substantial, more real, more capable of bearing the weight of an examined life. This is why Dostoevsky never offered easy solutions. He never promised that consciousness would make you happy in the conventional sense. What he promised was that it would make you real. It would strip away the pretense, the performance, the desperate grasping after fleeting satisfactions. It would leave you naked before existence itself. And yes, that nakedness is terrifying at first, but it's also honest in a way that nothing else can be. You cannot lie to yourself anymore. You cannot pretend things mean more than they do. You cannot manufacture fake joy to fill the emptiness. You are forced to be with what is, exactly as it is, without decoration or distraction. And in that terrible honesty, something extraordinary becomes possible. What becomes possible is what Dostoevsky called living love versus dreaming love. Dreaming love is the pleasure you've lost, the satisfaction that depends on things being other than they are, on illusions being maintained, on reality being kept at a comfortable distance. Living love is something else entirely. It's the capacity to be present with what is, including the suffering, including the darkness, including the unbearable truth of existence. It doesn't give you pleasure in the old sense. It gives you depth. It gives you authenticity. It gives you the ability to meet reality without flinching, to see the machinery behind the magic and not turn away, to know the price of everything and still choose to pay it. In The Brothers Karamazov, Father Zosima teaches that hell is the suffering of being unable to love. But what does it mean to love in this sense? It means to accept reality fully, to embrace existence exactly as it is, with all its suffering and all its beauty tangled together inseparably. You cannot have this kind of love while you're still addicted to pleasure, still chasing after satisfactions that depend on not looking too closely. You can only have it when pleasure has died and you've been forced to find something deeper to sustain you. What you're experiencing now, this terrible flatness, this loss of all the things that used to bring you joy, this is the death of pleasure seeking, and it feels like death because a part of you is dying, the part that could be satisfied with shadows, the part that could enjoy the party without asking who paid for it, the part that could find meaning in distractions. But Dostoevsky discovered that on the other side of this death, there is something waiting. Not happiness in the shallow sense, not pleasure as you knew it, but a kind of deep okayness with existence itself, a fundamental recognition that life, even with all its suffering, even with all its unbearable truths, is still somehow acceptable, not good in the sense of pleasurable, but right in the sense of real. You stop needing life to be other than it is. You stop demanding that existence justify itself to you. You accept the ticket you were given, the world you were born into, the truth you cannot unseen. And you find that acceptance itself is a kind of freedom that pleasure could never provide. This doesn't mean you become numb or indifferent. It means you become capable of experiencing reality without the constant need to escape from it through pleasure seeking. You can eat a simple meal, and it's enough. Not because it tastes amazing, but because you're actually present for it, actually tasting it, actually aware of the miracle of hunger and satisfaction. You can sit with another person, and the conversation doesn't need to be brilliant or entertaining, because you're actually there, actually listening, actually meeting them in the space between words. You can wake up in the morning, and the day doesn't need to promise anything special, because you're alive, you're conscious, you're here, and that itself becomes sufficient. This is what Dostoevsky meant when he wrote that beauty will save the world. Not beauty in the aesthetic sense, not pleasure or prettiness or comfort, but the beauty of seeing clearly, of being present fully, of accepting completely, the beauty of consciousness itself, even when consciousness reveals unbearable truths, even when seeing clearly cost you every simple pleasure you once enjoyed. Because what you gain in exchange for those lost pleasures is something that cannot be taken from you, cannot be destroyed by circumstance, cannot depend on external conditions. You gain yourself, your real self, the self that can meet reality face to face without masks or pretense or desperate grasping after distraction. So what do you do now, here in this strange flatland where nothing brings you pleasure anymore? Dostoevsky would tell you to stop trying to get the old pleasures back. Stop attempting to unsee what you've seen. Stop pretending you can return to the comfortable ignorance that once made life easy. You can't. That door is closed. You have to go forward, not backward. And going forward means sitting with this emptiness, this apparent meaninglessness, this loss of satisfaction, and letting it be exactly what it is without trying to fix it or escape from it or fill it with counterfeit joys. You have to become like Raskolnikov in his prison cell, like the underground man in his corner, like Prince Mishkin in his simplicity. You have to accept that you are no longer like other people, that you cannot enjoy what they enjoy, that you have been changed by what you've seen. And in that acceptance, in that surrender to what you've become, something shifts. The shift doesn't happen according to your timeline. You cannot force it or manufacture it or think your way into it. It comes when it comes, the way dawn comes after a long night. But it does come. One day, you notice that the emptiness isn't quite as oppressive. One day, you realize you're eating a meal and you're actually tasting it. Not because it's especially delicious, but because you're present. One day, you're sitting in silence, and it's not uncomfortable anymore. It's just silence, the desperate need for pleasure, for satisfaction, for meaning. It starts to quiet, and in that quietness, you begin to perceive what was always there beneath all your seeking: a simple isness, a bare fact of existing that doesn't need anything added to it to be acceptable. Life doesn't need to give you pleasure to be worth living. Consciousness doesn't need to feel good to be valuable. You don't need to be happy to be okay. This is the resurrection that follows the death, not a return to the old life, but an emergence into a new one. You still eat and work and interact with others, but you do it from a different place, not from need, or from the desire for pleasure, or from the fear of emptiness, but from a kind of neutral presence that doesn't require life to be other than it is. And paradoxically, this is when real joy becomes possible again, not the pleasure of satisfaction, but the joy of simply being here, simply being alive, simply being conscious, a joy that doesn't depend on things going well, or feeling good, or being entertained, a joy that exists even in suffering, even in darkness, even in the complete absence of pleasure as you once knew it. You are not broken because nothing brings you pleasure anymore. You are becoming real. You are shedding the false self that needed constant stimulation, constant satisfaction, constant distraction from the truth of what it means to exist. What remains when all that falls away is raw and tender and frightening at first. But it's you, the actual you, the you that can look at reality without flinching, the you that Dostoevsky believed was capable of bearing the unbearable, of seeing the unseeable, of loving life even when life offers nothing but truth. And truth, as you're discovering, is not always pleasant, but it's real. And real is what you've been searching for all along, even when you thought you were searching for pleasure. You were searching for something that couldn't be taken from you, something that didn't depend on maintaining comfortable illusions, something solid enough to bear the weight of consciousness. You've found it. It doesn't feel like you thought it would. It doesn't bring pleasure, but it's there, and it's enough. If any part of this resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in this strange state where nothing satisfies anymore because you've seen what lies beneath everything, share in the comments which moment of recognition hit deepest. Your words might reach someone else wandering in this same desert, someone who needs to know they're not alone in this transformation. And if you want to continue exploring what Dostoevsky understood about the soul's dark journey toward truth, subscribe for more reflections on the parts of being human that most people spend their lives avoiding. Remember, you are not losing your capacity for joy. You are discovering what joy really is beneath all the pleasure seeking. And that discovery, though it costs everything you thought made life worth living, gives you something far more valuable in return. It gives you the ability to be fully alive in a world that demands you stay half asleep. Thank you for walking this path with me.